Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Advisor. Now, I wanted to tell you about plastics. Are plastics a miracle or a menace? Today's scientist, Dr. Chris DeArmitt, busts the biggest myths about plastics and microplastics. So stay with us. By the end, you'll have 5 practical actions that you can use this week. Now, Dr. Chris, you are an expert when it comes to the environment, and you're the founder of Plastics Research Council and an author of Plastics Paradox. Welcome to the show. You have an excellent background in science. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so what I'm talking to you about today is not my professional job. My real job is solving problems for people, materials-based problems. Formulating, that means what additives do you use? What ingredients do you use? My wife likes to say I'm a chef for materials. And so I might help Apple or Procter and Gamble or Lego or somebody to make better products. And the reason I'm interested now about plastics in the environment is that my own daughters were at school. They came home from school, walked through the door over there one day, and they'd been told stuff by their teacher that just wasn't correct. And that made me angry as a scientist because I don't think we have a good future if we teach our kids things which are nonsense. So first I was angry at the teachers and the school, and then I thought, well, how are they supposed to know what's true and what isn't true? So I've been
Right.
on a little crusade here for the last 5 years to read thousands and thousands of studies, unpaid, just to have a credible source of information where teachers and politicians and everyone can go to and know that this is unpaid work backed by peer-reviewed science.
It's amazing because you've read over 5,000 studies, which is truly amazing, and
I
I
didn't have
commend.
these when I started.
Now, let's clear up the fog. What sounds true, but what isn't? The biggest myth you hear about plastics and the useful truth behind it. What are some of those?
There's a couple of big ones. One is this idea that plastic is everywhere. It's, all the materials we use, it's dominating the material use. And if you look at the numbers, plastic, we use about 400 million tons, which is a really big number. But it's hard for regular people, even for me as a scientist, to picture what that really means. So you have to compare it to how much material do we use overall, not just the one big number for plastic, but overall. And the answer is plastic is about 1/2 of 1% of the materials we use. So
Wow.
I'm not saying that we don't use a lot of plastics, we do, but it's a 0.5% of the total. And so that kind of puts things in perspective to say, at the moment, the mistake we're making is that we're talking all day long and making policies and doing things all about plastic as if it were the only material. And I never hear anyone talk about the other 99%. And
Right.
I'm a problem solver by profession. And a great way to fail to solve a problem or to really make a difference is to obsess over 0.5% and ignore the rest. I like to make the
Yes.
analogy. Imagine I came home, the house is a mess, and I just clean the cutlery drawer and hope that the rest of the house will clean itself. I'd have to be insane to think that.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what we're doing today when it comes to the environment. We shouldn't ignore plastics, but we shouldn't ignore the other 99% either.
Exactly. Exactly. And what are some of the other things that we tend to ignore?
Um, I think one of the things to think about when we're looking at the environment is everything we do has an impact. And
Mhm.
it's impossible to avoid unless you want to dig a hole in your garden and climb into it, which nobody seems to be willing to do. So, given that we're going to have some kind of impact, the only logical thing to do is to try and minimize it. So, buy less stuff, less waste, recycle things, all of that stuff you hear about. But also look at which material choice has more impact and which has less. So,
Yes.
and what we find is that plastic has the least impact of all the choices we have in
Yeah.
about 9 cases out of 10. So there are alternatives to plastic, but if you replace it with glass or paper or metal, you're making things worse 90% of the time. And usually
Really?
you're spending more money to do it. And that's what we
Yeah.
see now. People are spending extra, people with a good heart, people who care, are spending
Yeah.
extra to make things worse.
Well, nowadays, like, I don't know if you've noticed, but if you go into stores right now, and let's like you're looking for like some type of Tupperware, to store different foods and put them in the pantry or in the refrigerator. Now they're discriminating. They're saying, no, 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 plastic's not good anymore, and you're seeing glass bowls all over the place, and you
Yeah.
get less for the buck. And now, from what you say, it might not be the best choice, actually.
Oh, it's definitely the worst. If you look at life cycle studies, I mean, you can cherry pick studies, right, to prove a point you want to make. And I do the exact opposite. I find every study ever on a topic, and then I look at the score, right? Do
Yeah.
they agree? So if we look at plastic bags and versus paper, there are 30 studies on that alone, and every single one shows that the plastic bag has less impact than paper or cotton. And when
Really?
it comes to containers, like you just mentioned, plastic has least impact in every single study for drink bottles, for like soda bottles, for Tupperware containers, that kind of, that's a brand name, but food containers. It has the least impact. And another thing that people don't realize. If you look on average, and I can send you all the studies, it's in the book, which is
Yeah.
here's my book, by the way. This is for free. So I'm not trying to sell a book. This is all for free, and all the information's for free on the website because I back up everything I say with science. So if you look at
Yeah.
the impact of food, 3% is the packaging and 97% is the food. And that means that if you have a package that saves your food from spoilage or being damaged, you
Mhm.
save vastly more impact than was needed to make that packaging in the first place. So on average, when you use a plastic packaging, you save 5 to 10 times more greenhouse gas than was needed to make the packaging in the first place because you're protecting the food. And people don't
Wow.
talk about that. So you see these environmental groups talking about the impact of packaging, but then they don't tell you the other side of the equation. They don't tell you, well, how much impact did I save by
Yeah.
using the packaging? They never talk about that because they're not really interested in the environment. They're interested in some skewed thing that they're probably being paid off to say whatever their puppet masters want them to say, rather than showing both sides. I mean, that's fair in mathematics, right? We all did maths where we have two sides of an equation and we see which one is whether you have a positive or a negative. But that's what we're not hearing in the argument. We're not hearing the other side of that equation.
Wow. Now, are plastics always the worst choice versus pet paper, glass, or metal? When do the alternatives like backfire on you? Like, we just talked about this, but like when, by listening to what society has to say, what do you see happening in the future if we keep, listening, because you're
Mm.
saying that paper isn't as bad, glass, is actually worse. What's going to happen if we keep listening to what society says? Because it might be they're just doing it for their own benefit and not for the benefit of the people.
Yeah, well, I've seen credible evidence that, of course, it's an industry, right? People are competing here, so I've seen credible evidence that these other industries are paying to just slur the name of plastics and present things, which is okay in a way, but they shouldn't be saying things that aren't true. That's what makes me nuts. I don't really care what they do in terms of he says, she says, but it does make me angry when they say things which are absolutely wrong according to the science, and then they start teaching our kids and our teachers. And the thing that's going to backfire is this. Companies are going to lose reputation. They're out there presenting all of these solutions, selling you products based on the idea it's green, and it just isn't. I mean, one example is pipes. There's an organization out there funded by Michael Bloomberg, and they decided to just say plastic pipes are bad and copper are good, right? Which is exactly the opposite of what science says. Every study shows that copper pipes are just terrible compared to plastic pipes. They're toxic. They're vastly worse for the environment. They're vastly more expensive. And you have to think, how would a genuine environmental group come out and say things which are just so patently wrong if you compare it to what science says? It's not even close, right? It's not a close call. It's just black and white wrong. And these people have been in front of Congress saying things which are just not correct. So, yeah, there's going to be a big backlash here when companies that have exploited us and tugged on our heartstrings to sell us products based on the idea it's green, and then they get exposed and it turns out they're not green.
Yeah, and it's sad because all these things that you're saying right now are things that I hear all the time. So, and how are people supposed to know, especially if they don't understand the science, they don't know the science, they haven't read the studies, they're just going by what they see on TV, or they're going by the info commercials, or they're going by, what the news tells them. That's
Yeah.
all they have to go on is, what other people are saying.
Yeah, there's a couple of points there. Are going by the media, and if you look at trust in the media, it's at an all-time low. So I sometimes say that I give keynote talks now all around the world to companies, trade associations, even policymakers ask me to educate them, and I say, right, you have opinions about plastic now. But where are
Yeah.
they coming from? It's the media. And then you ask them, do you trust everything you hear in the media? And they say, no, no, no. And I say, okay, so now you've admitted that your opinions you have now, strong opinions, are based on an information source that you yourself don't trust. And so it might be time to rethink a little bit and say, okay, let me put that aside because I've just said myself I don't trust it. And see,
Yeah.
because you were telling me before the show, you check the studies, but hardly anyone's doing that. Everyone else is walking around with these cast iron, no pun intended, cast iron opinions but there's no real substance to them. If you ask them how many studies have you read, they say zero. So
Right.
that's the world we live in. Everyone's dead sure of themselves, but they forgot to do the homework.
Exactly, exactly. And I see that all the time and it drives me nuts. Now, what's the dangerous half truth that you see in the headlines and how should listeners, self-check it?
Yeah. How do you self-check? One of the things to do is to look at how strong is the evidence. So, for example, with bags, there are 30 studies and every single one agrees plastic bags have the lowest impact. So that's pretty clear, right? They're peer-reviewed studies, they've been checked, they have to be done according to a certain procedure. There's no real way to cheat, and they go across decades. So, that's one of the reasons I created the Plastic Research Council. That's a
Yeah.
bunch of scientists working without a single penny of compensation to share the science for free. And that's how we stay independent. And then I even had other professors from all around the world check the review that we did and make sure it was right. And imagine I was a charlatan, right? And I was out here just saying nonsense. The last thing I would ever do is to send it to professors all around the world that I don't know and ask them to check it, right? That would be a really bad idea. I'd lose completely face, and it would be humiliating. But the
Right.
exact opposite happened. They all came forth and endorsed the book and said positive things, and that's another thing that I do. I'm very careful to take the study and I copy and paste from the conclusions. So it's the exact words from the scientists. It's not my words. There's no spin on it. It's copied and pasted from the study with the citation and then a link. So there's hundreds of links on the Plastics Research Council website where you can
Yeah.
literally click it and check every single thing I say yourself. So that's one way to tell what's credible. How transparent are these people about their funding, about how they do what they're doing, and about showing you the evidence rather than just making claims.
I like that. That's very important also. And so, give us an example of a simple framework that the public can use, like what type of study type or what metric or what context to look for.
Well, one thing I like to say is that most scientists don't have time to check science when they're standing in the supermarket. And you
Yeah,
said
yeah.
that you wanted to give people action points of things that they can do that are very simple. And the easiest things to know are that plastic is usually, as I said, if you're statistically speaking, choosing plastic is probably going to be the right choice for the environment 9 times out of 10. And another way to know what's the right choice is just wait.
Yeah.
Here's a funny one, right? So let's say straws. Everyone likes to talk about straws. The greenest straw is no straw. It has a weight of zero, right? That is the lowest impact. The next lowest is a plastic straw and reuse it as many times as you can, which is 50 or 100. You can reuse it. Nobody's making you throw it away after one use. You can reuse that. And my daughter's done it 50 times. And then the next one is like the glass and the metal. They're much, much heavier and much more expensive. So the lightest and the cheapest solution are usually the greenest ones. And that's the irony. Now people are paying extra to make things worse, whereas they should
Yeah.
be paying less to make things better. And that will help everyone, especially when the economy turns and
Yes.
budgets tighten. We can all save money and feel good about ourselves.
100%. And it's funny, because I started buying glass bowls and I started to, because I heard, so much stuff about how bad, plastic is. And if the sun hits it, then the chemicals from the plastic are going to go into the food and the same thing with the water bottles. So, I immediately started to buy, the glass bowls and trying to be, better, thinking that I was doing something, positive for the economy and our environment and for our children and our family. And it seems like I'm doing the opposite.
Yeah. One thing that's quite strange when you think about it is that people make these claims about plastic and they're just not true. They say things like phthalates are coming out of PET. There was never phthalates in PET. It's not a thing. It can't, it's like I once said to the Washington Post journalist was asking me about some chemical and about whether I was worried about it leaching from some product. And I said, no. I said, are you worried about lions escaping from your back garden? And she said, no, I don't have any lions. And I said, aha, if something's not there, it can't escape. And it's the same with BPA. There is no BPA in PET bottles. There's no phthalates in PET bottles. There's nothing toxic in there. I mean, do you think the FDA would let us eat out of these things? Do you think that the EPA and all of these regulatory organizations, there are whole books about what are you allowed to put in things, how much is allowed to be there, how much is allowed to migrate, and so forth. This is not like the Wild West. This is not like Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett making up rules. This is, we've
Right.
got decades and decades of science and all of this. So there's two things to say about that. They made allegations about plastic bottles, here's something which will blow your mind. There's people dying in Africa because if you take well water, it's dangerous, right? It's got bacteria and it can kill you. And the way that
Right.
they prevent that is they take a used PET bottle, fill it with the water, and stick it on the roof. And the sunlight goes through the PET, the UV light, and sterilizes the water so it's safe to drink. It saves lives. Hundreds of thousands of people are using this method to save lives. And what they did was, and then they asked your question. They said, okay, I'm baking this PET bottle full of water. Is that what's coming out of the bottle? Is that safe? And so they literally baked these bottles on the roof, tested the water, and found there's nothing in there. So these
Wow.
tests have been done, right? Even under the most extreme conditions where you're baking it on a roof in Africa, it's boiling hot and it's still nothing happens. There's nothing coming out of them. And on the other hand, the glass companies, you can go and look into studies on toxic things coming out of glass. There's more
Yeah.
toxic metals coming out of glass than come out of plastic, and they never talk
Really?
about that. And
No.
I just had an inquiry from a reporter today. Is it safe to cook in copper pots? And the answer is no. There's all copper is toxic at 1 part per million, and yet we're drinking our drinking water out of copper pipes. And it's nothing could be crazier than taking something which is almost as toxic as lead, right? It's category
Yeah.
the EPA has a thing called the lead copper rule where they categorize them both as toxic. We got people telling us we should be drinking water out of copper pipes, and what happens? The copper dissolves and poisons us. It's utterly insane, and this is not like speculation. There's like study after study after study. There's
Yeah.
children being poisoned in the drinking fountains at school from copper.
Oh, wow.
And there's babies being poisoned because baby formula contains copper as a nutrient, right? But if you combine that
Yes.
with the copper from the water from your faucet, now you have too much copper, dangerous levels of copper for the baby. And nobody's talking about any of that stuff. They're so busy talking about plastic, nobody's checking anything else.
And I also, in the supplement world, they talk about copper and
Mhm.
they sell, copper supplements and they say they list all these benefits about how, it's good to take copper supplements and that it can, do benefits for the body.
Yeah, almost everything is good up to a certain point, and then toxic after that. So yeah, you need to get just the right dose.
Right.
If you have a very small amount, not a problem. If you have too much, it is a problem. And so that's the problem with copper. The baby formula has just the right amount for the baby, and then when you add extra, now you have too much.
Exactly. And the only way to really find out these things is through a blood test. If you're not checking your blood frequently, then you don't really know how much you might be overdosing yourself with, or if you're
Mhm.
balanced, or if you're deficient in something. So it's, people all the time they're taking things and they don't even realize, what they're putting in their body or how it's affecting the body. To get
Yeah.
back to this subject, what do we actually know about microplastics exposure and in people and what's still uncertain?
I'm glad you asked that one. So that's probably the biggest area of total misconceptions. So the public perception is that microplastic is a new, unstudied threat. And in reality, it's not new because we have 50 years of science on it. It's not
Right?
unstudied because we have about 2,000 studies on it, peer reviewed studies. And it's not a threat because it's non toxic and amounts are very low. And just to give you an
Yeah.
idea, plastic is part of dust, right? People are like, "Oh, we found plastic on Everest." Like, no kidding, you found dust on Everest. That shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, right? It's like you'd have to be. Imagine I called an editor of the New York Times and say, "Hey, I found dust on my keyboard. I want the front page." They'd laugh in my face, right, and put the
Yeah.
phone down. But that's what journalists are getting away with now. They're saying, "Hey, we found plastic dust here or there." So plastic is about 0.001% of dust and non-toxic. And we have decades and decades of studies, and the FDA have tested it. It's just not a problem. And so, just to give you an idea, that your lifetime exposure is less than 1 gram. Eating and breathing is less than 1 gram in your whole lifetime over 70 years. Whereas you could eat 70 grams a day and nothing would happen to you of polyethylene,
Wow.
of polypropylene, of PET. You could eat a whole coffee cup or a drinking cup every day and nothing would happen apart from you might lose weight because you'd feel full when you hadn't eaten food. So we have all the safety data. And then you ask yourself, well, if it's not a problem, why are we worried about it?
Yeah.
And scientists looked at that too, and they compared what are the journalists telling us to what scientists are telling us. And they found
Mhm.
something very interesting. They found out that scientists are saying that microplastics are non-toxic and exposure is too low to be a problem to the oceans, to us, to cats, to dogs, to fish, not a problem. But the newspaper articles, 93% of media articles say it is a problem, even though the scientists are saying it isn't.
Right.
So the scientists literally proved we're being lied to about microplastics because that's what sells newspapers.
Oh, that's horrible. Now, dose, size, exposure, like routes, which one matters the most?
Well, none of them really matter at all because they're all so incredibly small. So, for example, imagine we're told by the World Wildlife Fund that you eat a credit card of plastic a week. Science says that would take more than 1,000 years to do, right? So exposure is just so low, it's not a thing. And even when you do eat it, it just goes right through you, just like all the other particles that we're exposed to. It just passes right through without any effect. So it's not like it can go, it's just not causing any problem. And they even looked at that microplastics in the ocean. They said even if it was hundreds of times higher than it is today, it still wouldn't be a problem, wouldn't cause any issue whatsoever.
Wow. Because they've done a study where they had all the water bottles, and there was chemicals still in a lot of these streams where they got the water. And so I assume that you would have to drink a lot of that water in order for something terrible to happen, because they all have small dosages. They're all, they say they're pure, but they're not actually pure. They do have some chemicals from the water residue, but it's
Yeah.
probably little that it probably doesn't do anything
Yeah, you made a
much.
great point. So one thing to realize now is that the detection machines are so sensitive they can detect anything. So some of these studies, I'm reading it, I'm like, well, how I detected this, I detected that, and the layperson's like, oh my God, they
Yeah.
detected whatever. But detection doesn't mean anything. It's like, is it a toxic level, right? Is it a problem level? And so even I was looking at these units, and it was nanograms per liter. That's what they were using as units. And I'm a PhD chemist. I didn't know what that really means. So I looked it
Yeah.
up, and a nanogram per liter is a millionth of a part per million.
Wow.
Right. So, and that means that, so let's say, just to give you an idea, if you started with the population of the world as 8 billion people, and you took a
Yeah.
millionth of that, I think that would be like 80 people or 800 people. And if you took a millionth of that, it would be one hand.
Yeah.
So this out of the population of the world is a millionth of a millionth. And
Yeah.
these are the levels that they're detecting and trying to tell us it's a problem when it really isn't. So
Right.
that's kind of, you have to really differentiate between I detected something and I detected an amount that's really worth talking about.
Right.
And when it comes to water, you made me think of something else. Many of these studies find, let's say they find phthalates in water, and they say, oh, it must have come from the PET bottle. And what they don't tell you is there's just as much in the glass bottle. There's just as much in the tap water. There's just as much in the river or the stream or the rainwater. So some of these studies are not doing the science properly. They're not testing. They fill a bottle with water and say, oh, look, whatever I found in the water must have come from the bottle. You're like, no, it came from the water. And that's scientifically proven, but no one talks about it because that's not a headline.
Yes. Now, what are everyday habits that can reduce unnecessary exposure without obsessing?
I would say just one thing to know about is dust in general can be a problem, right? So particles in general, it is right to be worried about particles, not plastic in particular, but there are other particles. For example, farmers in the field, they're just tilling up the dirt and you get all this dirt in the air. And a lot of that is quartz. And if you breathe that, you can get cancer. That's scientifically proven carcinogen is just rocks and dirt dust. Rock
Wow.
dust is proven to be a problem. And then you have like lead and arsenic and tin, and even wood dust is a proven carcinogen. And then you have
Really?
skin cells in dust and you have all kinds of things. So, in general, be careful about not breathing in too much dust. And if you do breathe it in, if you're in a really dusty environment, wear a mask and all that kind of stuff. Not because of plastic, but because there are other things in much higher amounts which are toxic. So, be careful of those things.
Wow, that's good to know because I wasn't aware of that myself. Now, if a scary headline drops tomorrow, what are two questions we should ask ourselves before we share it with our friends or family members?
Yeah, it's not a good idea to just look at headlines because the job of a journalist is to scare you and sell you whatever it is, get advertising dollars, get clicks, and all that
Yes.
kind of stuff. So, as we just heard, it's scientifically proven that the journalists have lied to us about microplastics. And that's why I appreciate you having me on the show because the truth is sadly more boring than the fiction. So, if I tell you that there's a spoonful of microplastics in the brain, that's a headline. But if I tell you there isn't a spoonful of microplastic in your brain, then that's not news. So this is the
Right.
problem that the truth is intrinsically more boring than the lies. And so ask yourself, if this sounds really scary, if this sounds really startling, it's probably not true. And then go and check it with some scientists.
That's a really good point. Now, let's talk waste and recycling and oceans where personal choices actually move the needle. Now, when do plastics reduce environmental impact like transport, food waste, and medical? When do they increase it?
Yeah, so if you look at transportation, that's down to weight. So, for example, I saw somebody saying, "Hey, we need to start using reusable cutlery on the airplanes. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing?" And in theory, it is a wonderful thing. But if you do the life cycle study, you find out that increasing weight from plastic to reusable metal or whatever, now you're spending more fuel in your airplane, you're creating
Yes.
more CO2, and it's just worse for the environment. So, ironically, it's better to use single-use plastic than to use reusable metal cutlery, and that's a scientific fact. It's been studied. It's the same with
Wow.
other some other reusable cases. So a reusable bag, in theory, a reusable plastic bag would have lower impact than a regular bag, but in
Yeah.
reality, people forget them in the closet at home, and now you've bought more plastic. So this is the ironic thing: when you ban plastic bags, you end up selling more plastic and increasing harm because people
Yeah.
forget those bags. And it's the same with drink bottles. They studied. Carbonate, soda bottles. So the lowest
Mhm.
impact is the single-use PET bottle.
Yeah.
Next is the reusable PET bottle, and much, much worse is aluminium cans and glass because they need so much more energy and impact to create them. So people are relying on, they're saying, well, they're more recyclable, and that's not really true. They create more impact no matter what the recycling rate is.
Yeah, when it comes to those bags, I can't tell you how many of those bags I have in the back of my car. So some of them are in my basement. And the funny thing is that we had the plastic and that worked out so well for so long. Now we have these bags, but then you have bacteria that grows from these bags too.
Yes, I've got
And
studies on that. Yes, they got studies on reusable drinking bottle water, and they've got studies on reusable cloth bags for groceries. And there's E. coli and all kinds of toxic things. There's even been reports of spikes in health concerns after bag bans, where people went to the reusable bags, didn't wash them, and had health problems. So yeah, that's not very solid science. That particular study is not a big, robust study.
yeah,
There's not multiple studies, but there are indications that there are health effects coming from reusables. And then, of course, you have to wash them, which has an environmental impact. So you have to
yeah,
count that in when you're looking at the whole picture. One thing I want to say
exactly.
about plastic, one thing that, so I looked at plastic use. Plastic
Hmm.
is less than 1% of materials, less than 1% of waste, less than 1% of greenhouse gas on a net basis, less than 1% of fossil fuel used on a net basis. So when you look at all the things that we criticize plastic for, none of them turn out to be true. And then you
Yeah,
ask yourself, well, why are people really against plastic if none of this stuff adds up? And the answer is litter. The one thing that you see is this plastic litter, and people never want to blame themselves, right? We know as scientists that litter is caused by people, but
yeah,
people will never look in the mirror and blame themselves. They'll do anything to avoid it. So they blame the plastic company or they blame the beverage manufacturer because they can't bear to blame themselves. But scientists
right.
have studied litter, and 81% is dropped intentionally on the floor. They literally watch these people drop it on purpose and then blame the manufacturer. And one
Wow.
great example is these are plastic banknotes. They
Yes.
print 8 billion of these a year. That's one for every person on the planet. And I've never seen one on the floor in my life. I've never seen one on the beach. I've never seen one on a river. I've never seen one floating on the ocean.
Yes.
And so this is proof that people cause litter. As soon as this small, easily lost piece of plastic has a value, nobody drops it anymore
Right.
because they don't want to lose the money. It's the same with credit
Right.
cards and so forth. And that's why deposits work. So people are always asking, should I put a deposit scheme? Do they work? And the answer is yes, because now you're turning that bottle into money and no one will drop
Yes.
it. So you end up with like 95, 99% collection rates. Once that bottle has a value, people choose not to drop it anymore. So that's the number one reason people are genuinely against plastic. But even that one is wrong because it's themselves that are to blame, even though they won't admit it.
100%. Oh, that's a very good point. Now, recycling reality, and what works now and what doesn't, and what's the most promising fix that we have?
Yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions about recycling. So, the first thing to know is that if you look at a life cycle study, plastic usually has lowest impact even without recycling.
Hmm.
So, the public think that we need recycling to make things green and to stop litter. It doesn't
Yeah,
make them green, they're already the lowest impact, and it doesn't stop litter because I don't walk down the road and think, oh, I'm not going to drop this on the floor because it could be recycled. I'm either
right.
going to drop it or I'm not going to drop it. So people want recycling for all the wrong reasons. Having said that, when you do recycle mechanically, you reduce the impact a further 70 or 80%. So recycling plastics mechanically is good. You're taking something, it's like the icing on the cake. You're taking
Hmm.
something which is already good and making it even better when you mechanically recycle it.
I love that. Now, when do plastics reduce the environmental impact?
Usually in every case. So the only times that I've seen something else that was greener than plastic was wood. So wooden wine corks are greener than plastic ones. Wooden decking can be greener than plastic because just a lump of wood is really low impact. It's coming from
Yeah.
nature and so forth, and it's just grown and sawn. And the trouble with wood is it's not very versatile. We can't make computers, we can't make mobile phones, we can't make EKG machines out of wood. So
Yeah.
we can't make soda bottles out of wood very conveniently. And paper is surprisingly high impact. So if you look at 40 life cycle studies, every one I've ever seen, paper has higher impact than polyethylene, for example.
Wow. I asked you something similar earlier, and I just wanted you to repeat that because I was stunned when you gave me those answers. Because, all those things, people, they don't realize how toxic they really, can be, like, and the things that we sometimes think are the most toxic are not, and vice versa. And the things that we think are the least are the most.
Yeah.
And, it's a lot of misconception.
One problem people have is they assume that natural is best, and I say, well, would you eat a cup full of rattlesnake poison? I hope not, right? If you look at, which is, it's a natural, it's like built into us that natural must be
Yeah.
safe or whatever, but it's like, really? And do you know how many poisonous spiders there are, or mushrooms, or whatever? And I made a table I think it was in my first book, or it might be in the second one, of the top 5 most poisonous things ever discovered, and 4 of them out of 5 are
Yeah.
natural. Botox is number 1, most poisonous thing ever invented, never ever
No,
discovered. Yep.
really?
Toxic at the lowest concentration of anything, and people are injecting themselves with it. So it's kind of crazy how what you think, as you said, is not really what's true. It's our gut instinct doesn't do a very good job of explaining the science.
Yeah. And I'm very surprised when you said Botox because right now, Botox is is the thing. Everybody, I'm not going to say everybody, but a large proportion of our society is consistently trying to stay youthful and young looking, and people are consistently using Botox and they're finding other ways they could use Botox
Yeah.
and it's a hazard. Wow.
Well, it's a good example, right? If you use something at a safe dose, it's therapeutic. And if you use it at 10 times the dose, you're dead. So it's kind of
Yes.
like that. Everyone's busy saying we're being exposed to this, exposed to that. We're exposed to everything, and we can measure anything anywhere. I could measure anything I wanted to on your laptop right now because the
Yeah.
machines are so sensitive. Whereas that doesn't really tell us anything. We need to look at the dose and is it a problem or not. And when it comes to plastics and microplastics and chemical additives from plastics, there's just no evidence of any problem whatsoever.
Wow. Now, if you were the mayor for a day, what policy or program would you deploy for first?
I would make sure that anyone who proposed a policy had to have evidence for it, because if you look at like plastic bag bans, as I said, they increase sales of plastic. People have to go and
Yeah.
buy much thicker plastic trash can liners when you ban
Mhm.
the grocery bag. So
Yes.
the plastics industry should be in favor of bag bans because they sell so much more plastic. And these bans have been made despite the fact you can go to Google right now and type in LCA for life cycle analysis bag. And you will find studies from Clemson and all around the world saying exactly what I just said. It takes you 3 seconds to find the studies showing that the plastic bag has the lowest impact. Why doesn't
Wow.
Greenpeace know that? It's been out for 20 years. Why doesn't the World Wildlife Fund? Why doesn't the Ellen MacArthur Foundation? Why don't these organizations that claim to be for the environment, why don't the politicians who claim to be for the environment find 5 minutes to go and sit down with Google and read the studies? It boggles my mind that they have almost unlimited resources, unlimited funding, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in the case of some of these NGOs who claim to care about the environment. And it's never
Yes,
occurred to any of them in the last 30 years to sit down with Google and check the facts. That's really embarrassing at best and negligent at worst.
I agree with you. Now, one trade-off most people miss when they're comparing materials, what is that?
What's the thing they miss? Well, as I said, probably the biggest thing they miss is the benefit. You have to look at like a bank account. Let's say I invested $1 and you're like, oh my
Mhm.
goodness, Chris just lost $1. And then I say, well, I'm going to get 10 back again. You're like, oh, well, that's good. It's the same thing they're doing with plastics. They're saying we have to generate CO2 or use fossil fuel to make this little bit of packaging. And they forget
Yeah.
to tell you that we save 10 times more fossil fuel and greenhouse gas by using the packaging. So that is the biggest
Right.
misconception, that people are cheating by only looking at one side of the equation and trying to skew the results, or distracting us with things like, yeah, the recycling rate, or that it's natural, or something like that. They're not presenting the facts fairly and clearly.
Right. So I'm going to read a claim and I want you to rate it. I want you to rate it either true or misleading or myth and, and or something like that. So microplastics are in our blood, you know, in our blood.
That's it. Yeah, so there are studies on that. So there's two things to say about that. Dust is everywhere. There are particles in our body, and let me tell you something that will blow your mind. Do you know when the first report of particles in the body and moving around was? Guess what year it was?
What?
Not plastic, but any particle.
Any particle?
Yeah.
When we first, I would say in the 70s, we probably started to, or late 60s is when we started to realize these things.
1844. So
Really?
when I first heard about plastic particles in the body, I was like, "Oh, that sounds weird. What? Let me look into it." And so that's one thing I do, right? I'm very, very thorough. I look at the big picture. Is plastic the only particle? Like, no. Everything that you can find in dust has been found in the blood, in the placenta, in the body, moving around. And it sounds weird when you first hear about it, but our body's used to. In the time that you and I have spoken, we've both breathed in 1 million particles. And plastic was 0.001% of it and non-toxic. And the rest of it was dead skin cells, lead, arsenic, tin, quartz that causes cancer, wood dust that causes cancer, bacteria, spores, everything you can imagine. And that's the weird thing. We're ignoring things that actually are harmful and obsessing over something that isn't. So yeah, I've got studies on plastic in the blood. And this is the amazing thing. They found one plastic particle for every 99 pigment particles.
Really?
Yeah, phthalocyanine blue, phthalocyanine green, different types of iron oxide, titanium dioxide, all of these things. And this is another case where people are skewing the data. So all of the studies that you read are throwing away every other particle and saying, "Oh, I found a plastic particle." There was a study last week for and what was that one? Oh yeah, two studies this year where they took a vacuum cleaner, the vacuum cleaned houses and cars, and said, "We found microplastics." And you know what those studies did? They threw
What?
away 99% of the particles, including everything that causes cancer and everything that's toxic, threw it away, didn't tell you about it, and said, "Oh, I found a plastic particle." That is how skewed and useless that science is. I would be ashamed to publish a study like that. They should have to pay the money back out of their own money
Yes.
and say, "I'm sorry for being so misleading and so unprofessional as to throw away everything dangerous, 99% of my sample, and only tell you about one particle that's not even a problem." So that's the
Oh,
kind of shocking hysteria that's pushing scientists to do crazy stuff.
that is crazy. So in bottled water, is it always worse than tap?
No, I would say that bottled water saves lives. I mean, you've got people after natural disasters that would have died without bottled water. So there's no evidence that bottled water is dangerous whatsoever. It's cleaner in many ways than well water. I've seen some scary things about what's in home wells. Right? It's they're not
Yeah.
they're unregulated. They've got really awful things in them in some cases. So bottled water is a safe source, and also tap water is very safe. But
Yes.
preferably through plastic pipes. They're safer than copper pipes.
Wow. So now for bioplastics, but is it true that bioplastics can fix the problem or is that a myth?
It's a myth. So most of the plastics we think of as bioplastics, the new ones, they're worse for the environment and they cost more.
Mhm.
And it sounds natural again because they're natural, right? These bio, it
Yes.
must be good, but it's not true. They're
Mhm.
just worse. They're worse properties, worse for the environment, more expensive. Some of the bioplastics are the same plastics we use today, like polyethylene and polypropylene and PET or
Yeah.
nylon, made from plant feedstock instead of fossil fuel. And those ones are pretty good for the environment, but there's still no evidence that they're better than the fossil fuel based ones if you look at all of the factors. So you can make standard plastics out of plant based material. You can go and buy them right now, which the public's not aware of, but
Yeah.
there's no real true advantage to them.
Wow. Now, paper bags are greener than plastic bags. Is that a myth or is that a truth or
Yeah,
a
there's 30
mystery?
studies. Every study says that's wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. Decades of studies. It's just
Really?
not true. Total nonsense. I mean, a Kroger bag weighs 60 grams. So if I drop one on the floor, that's 60 grams of litter. The Kroger plastic bag weighs 6 grams. So you can imagine how much more efficient that is in terms of
Yeah.
materials usage. And you can reuse the plastic one, whereas the paper one will get soggy and lose all of its strength. Same with
Right.
straws, paper one worse. Every study I've ever seen, same with mailer envelopes. Amazon
Yeah.
wants to go to the paper ones. They're worse for the environment, according to every study. The plastic one
Well,
has lower impact.
Well, even those paper straws, I don't know if you've been to restaurants, they give out paper straws now. You can barely get any liquid through the paper straws.
I
Maybe
know.
you do two or three sips max, if you can get three sips, and then the straw is no good anymore.
Yeah, yeah, I know. It's incredible that people as old as me, they remember why we got rid of paper straws in the first place. They're useless. Um, but yeah, that shows you what good lobbying can do. A lot of these industries are out there lobbying people. They're
Oh
pushing
yeah.
politicians. They're spending a lot of money to put out strange information that just doesn't add up.
Yeah, I see that all the time and it makes me so upset. It really does. Now, chemical-free products are safer. Is that a myth or is that a truth?
Well, there's no such thing as chemical free. We are made of chemicals. Everything that you can touch is made of a chemical. So yeah, that's a myth. Water is a chemical. So there is no chemical free. There's no life without chemicals. I'm a chemist. I have to say that.
Okay, so listeners, we were promised five concrete actions. So, Chris, what are the five? So, when it comes to being able to live a healthier life, like maybe right-size packages, do we buy bulk where it cuts waste or avoiding over packaging? What are your five things that are going to help people actually improve their life environmentally
The
that they
biggest
can
thing
do?
overall is something you said before we started recording is that stress is one of our biggest threats to us. And at the moment, people are stressing over things. Stress is an important natural thing, right? We should be stressed. If I'm at war, if people are
Yeah,
shooting at me, I should be stressed, right? If I've got no food, I should be stressed. But at the
right,
moment, people are stressing over microplastics, which is not a threat, it's not a problem, and it's not worth stressing over. You're endangering your health over something that was not a danger to your health in the first place. It's the same
right.
with all this packaging nonsense and all of that. The things you should do is de-stress by not believing. Yeah. So the things we can do to really help is not to stress over these salacious headlines, which sound scary. Don't worry about microplastics. Don't worry about packaging. Don't worry about any of that nonsense. Focus on things you can really do to help the environment, like fly less, drive less, and eat less meat. Those are three things you can really do that will have more influence than anything you can ever do with plastics. Plastic is less than 1% of anything you can measure. So don't think about that. Think about things you can really do, like using less material, flying less, and so forth. And if you're in the supermarket, buy the cheapest and lightest solution you can because that's usually the greenest one, if that's what you care about.
Just out of curiosity, why is flying less better for your health?
Oh, it's not better for the health, it's better for the environment. So
Oh, I see what you mean.
yeah. So
Okay.
the things
Okay.
that people think they can do for the environment, like bags, have no influence whatsoever. They don't even show up. The things you can actually do to help the environment are
I see.
flying less, driving less, and eating less meat, for example. Getting more efficient heater for your home, things like that. This plastic obsession is just not. It's just a big distraction from actually making progress.
Yeah. And and I keep thinking of all the plastic I threw out a couple months ago because of, I kept hearing about how bad it was and how bad it was. And I had, over the years, I've collected so much plastic, like, Tupperware and stuff like that. And I was thinking, well, maybe it's, I see all the, I went to the supermarket, I went to Sam's Club, I saw all these new, glass bowls. I'm like, well, maybe environmentally, they're really pushing it. It must be better, and because I saw it, all over the place, I just assumed, and I didn't do any research. I just assumed because, I just kept seeing it all over the place, and I figured,
Yeah.
oh, and then the myth you hear about plastic all the time, for
Yeah.
years I've been hearing about plastic,
The glass
and so
industry PR machine won. They made you spend your dollars and throw away a perfectly good thing to replace it with something that's 5 times worse for the environment. They can congratulate themselves that they're so effective. I want to make one thing clear. People think that I'm a plastic evangelist. I don't care what people have. This is not a plastic polyester jacket. If you offer me a PET bottle or a plastic or a glass or a metal one, I'll pick the glass or metal one over the PET one every day. I prefer it. What drives me nuts as a scientist is that people are lying to my kids at school, that people like you
yeah,
are being misled, people who care are being misled into spending more money to make the world worse. That's what I care
yeah.
about, not what you actually pick. People should be free as adults to pick exactly what they want, but I don't want them picking them based on misinformation. That's what drives me nuts.
Yes, and I agree with you because that a lot of times a lot of these things bug the hell out of me. I just get very upset because I see so many people get caught up with so many lies, and when I see the marketing industry and I see how they market things and how they manipulate in their marketing, and then you see how things are written, and then you look and you see who's writing these things
Hmm.
and the lack of knowledge they have in this area. They're just told to write these things.
Yeah.
It's really upsetting because, if you look at people's health, their health is declining,
Yes.
and it's because of misinformation. And the best time when we talk about the environment, the healthiest time we had in a long time was during COVID, when everybody was in their house. We weren't able to leave. The ozone layer closed up. It was like the water got better, everything got better because we kept stood in the house and we didn't go out, and we weren't misled to do things that were hurting the environment.
Well, there's a book you may enjoy called Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker. He's a professor at Harvard, and he's one of the most influential scientists in the world. And he like me, quotes hundreds of studies when he does something. And if you read what he wrote, you may be uplifted about the actual state of things. We have lower war than we ever had. We got better health than we ever had. We got better longevity we ever had. We're richer than we ever had. So people are full of doom and gloom. But if you actually look at the numbers, these are the best times humanity's ever known. And yet we still look for things to obsess over, right? It's like,
Yes,
we wouldn't have time to talk about microplastics if we actually had a threat to our lives. People in Africa are not
exactly.
talking about microplastics. They're worried about where the next meal's coming from. So it's kind of like
Exactly.
the richer and better off you get, the more crazy stuff you find to obsess over that makes no difference. So we need to stop
That's
doing that and stop stressing ourselves out.
Yes, 100%. Now, you have two books, correct? Well, you showed us the one book, but you do have two books that you have published, correct?
Yeah, I got three actually. One's Innovation Abyss, which is for free. The next one's The Plastics Paradox, that's been out for 5 years, checked by professors all around the world. Nobody ever found a factual error in it. And then the new one is Shattering the Plastics Illusion. And this one cites hundreds of studies. And if you go to plasticsresearchcouncil.com, where we work unpaid to share the science, you can read all of this. You can download the book for free, and you can click the links to go and check every single study yourself. So I'm very transparent with how the science is done. And you also see reviews from these professors all around the world to verify that this is not some crazy, kooky guy with a contrarian opinion. My opinion is the one that's reflected by the science. Unfortunately, it's contrarian to what the media are telling us.
Right, exactly, exactly. Well, from our conversation today, if there's one thing we just discussed the most important factors, but if you want to leave anybody with a thought that you would like them to remember from our conversation, is there any particular thing that you really want people to remember from our conversation?
Well, plastic is less than 1% of everything, and please just don't stress out over every little detail. Just as you said, stress is a major cause of health problems, and don't stress over things where there's no need to. Focus on your family, spend some time listening to music, read a book, do something more productive with your life than worrying about 0.001% of something.
Yes, I like that. That is great advice. That is great advice. And you said that we can find your books on your website. Can you tell us your website, please?
Yeah, one is phantomplastics.com. It's free there, and it's also free at plasticsresearchcouncil.com. So both of those sites have the book and the information uh, shared freely in different languages too.
And do you have any information or articles that people can go to if they want to learn more about what we discussed today?
Yes, there are articles at both of those websites for free, so they can dig deep into that and microplastics, waste, litter, ocean plastics, everything you can, degradation, it's all covered.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Dr. Chris, this has been amazing. I thank you so much for coming on the show. And also, before we go, you can find these books on Amazon, you said also. So if they
Yes.
can go to your website or they can go on Amazon. And we'll leave the links in our description box so people can have all the information. But, Dr. Chris, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you, taking the time and the effort to really make change. You saw that your daughters were not getting the proper information, and you were proactive, and you did something about it, and you used your knowledge and your wisdom, and you went out and got more knowledge and wisdom to actually put together the three beautiful books and those two websites. And now you're speaking widely, all over the United States and all over the world to educate and to help others understand the importance of what truly is important and what truly is not important, and
Yes.
the real truth about plastics. And so, because a lot of times what we learn in elementary school or in school we take those things to heart and we don't forget them. And believe it or not, you could remember certain things that certain teachers tell us, and it gets embedded in our brain. And sometimes it gets lodged into our belief system. And sometimes we tend to live life according to what the people who we admired said,
Yeah.
and it's hard to let go of those
I mean, they taught
things.
us this an apple a day keeps the doctor away. And that's the best marketing campaign ever. It's completely nonsense. There's no evidence for it, and everyone knows it. So this is the kind of nonsense you can put in a kid's brain. And that's what I would like to see not happen. I'd like to see them learn something that's really true that will help them in their lives. So thank you so
Exactly.
much, Stacey. I really appreciate the opportunity to show some science, and I encourage everyone to follow up, to check everything I just said and read the science and verify it for themselves.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Chris. This has been a wonderful experience, and I thank you so much for you and for everything you're doing. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
You have a great day.